Caro Kann is what we're going to discuss now. It's one of the most popular openings in a modern chess theory. And unlike a number of other openings, you can see improvements done regularly, improvements for black, for white. It's the opening that was very successfully used by top grandmasters in the world, such as Anatoly Karpov and Bareyev and some others. So let's view the Caro Kann from white's standpoint. So what I would recommend, e4, c6, d4, d5. Now from here there are countless ways for white to play. There is enormous amount of sharp variations. What I would recommend, if you want to adapt one simple system and you want to learn Caro Kann, how to play against Caro Kann the easy way, I can recommend this system that once years ago was played by Fischer, and I like to play it all the time, and I have my own ideas in this opening, and I would say this is very reliable system. System I'm talking about, E takes D, C takes D. For someone who likes C4, to play C4, which is Velimirovich variation or the Panov attack, they call it differently. Well, of course you can do that, but system I am referring to is bishop to D3. Now, the most common move for black is knight C6, white goes C3, and knight F6 is the most common way to play. There are a couple of other ways to play, such as G6 for black, but we're going to cover that later. Now, after knight F6, what can happen here? White goes bishop F4, and now black has to choose how do they want to develop their pieces. Obviously, E6 is a bad way to play because bishop on C8 becomes totally locked in this diagonal on C8 and D7 and very passive. So black has to try to develop bishop on G4 and then play E6 and conclude development this way, or they can play G6. Actually, they could have played G6 even move earlier, so that they could probably transpose. And after G6, so let's look at G6 first. We can look at those variations in a random order. So G6, what I would do is knight D2, bishop G7, knight F3, black castles, and the move I would recommend here to play, not the castling, which is a normal move for white to play, but I would recommend to play H3 move. And there is an idea behind this move. What is the idea? White is making waiting move, which is not totally useless because it stops bishop G4 and also prepares maybe in future G4, pawn G4, as you can see very shortly. If white castled in this position, the most logical move for black is to play bishop F5, bishop takes F5, pawn takes F5, followed by knight to E4. So that would have been okay position for black. So that's why white plays H3. That's what I would recommend. Now bishop F5, you can see it's not a good move. If black plays bishop F5, which is a standard idea here, now you understand why we didn't castle. bishop takes f5, pawn takes f5, and pawn g4. Now black is in real jeopardy. Here is what's going to happen. Black's f5 pawn is hanging right now. If black plays f takes g, after h takes g, you can see that files opened on the king side, and black is in a big danger. Queen c2 may be played, or g5, and h file open. White has good prospects for attacking on the king side. So on the other way, black may play queen d7. Then after queen c2, there is still the same problem. Pawn on f5, and later what's white going to do is castle queen side and play rook d to g1. Black's king position is very scary. So black is in trouble here. So this is how I would recommend to play against the g6 system. So the move, only new thing here, comparing to the modern theory, is h3 move. Of course, black can play something else. Black does not have to play bishop f5, but then they have difficulties finding useful move. Well, for instance, if they play something like rook e8, we are not going to wait forever. When will black play bishop f5? Then we probably would castle, go queen e2, rook e1, and knight e5, like a normal plan would be in this position. But h3 is a useful move and also sets some kind of positional trap. Bishop f5, which is bishop takes f5, and g4 that we just looked. Now let's go and cover different continuations, not g6. Variation I'm talking about is most common and most popular bishop to g4.
4, 3, 2.
White's best move is queen to b3, attacking b7 pawn. And again, black has several options here to protect b7 pawn. So one of them is queen d7. Second is queen c8. Third is queen to b6. And fourth is knight to a5. Now again, we can go with it in any order. Now let's start with a knight move. There is one knight move and three queen moves. So knight a5. This was played by Petrosian, former world champion, against Bobby Fischer. Queen a4 check, bishop to d7, and queen to c2. Now what did white do? White played queen b3, queen a4, and queen c2. Is it good? Three moves with a queen ending up on c2. Yes, it is good, because while white was doing it, black was dislocating its own pieces. Knight stands on a5 is not the best way, and queen on b6 is not, and bishop on d7 is not too great. Now after queen c2, interesting move is queen b6. You can notice here that black has not such a good bishop on d7. They would love to play bishop b5 and exchange those bishops. White's best response is pawn to a4, and if black tries to play knight b3, then after rook a2, you see that knight on b3 does not have any better option than going back to a5. So after queen to c2, if black plays queen b6, white goes a4, and white's plan is very simple. They want to prevent exchange of the dark light square bishops by bishop b5, and they want to play knight to d2, knight to f3. Eventually they're going to castle and put the knight on e5. That will give them very comfortable position. And there is no really, black does not really have some effective plan to some effective way to prevent it. So after bishop g4, queen b3, we just covered knight a5, and we have three moves with a queen left: queen b6, queen d7, and queen c8. Again, we're going in some random order. Queen b6. Recommended way to play for white is queen takes b6, pawn takes b6, and in this position, before black plays e6, we have an opportunity to play knight a3, and when black plays e6, then knight b5. White's knight very well placed on b5, and after king d7, white can simply play either knight to e2 or f3 followed by knight to e2, and white has some advantage because of damaged pawn structure for black, b7 and b6 pawns. This is some advantage for white. So we covered already 2 out of 4 moves. We covered knight a5 and queen b6. Let's go with the queen d7 move. Queen d7 move was known as not a good move, and it became more popular in later years. So the reason most popular move is queen c8. Why would you want to protect your pawn on b7 by playing queen c8 rather than queen d7? There is a reason behind it. The reason is this: after queen d7, knight to d2. Normal move for black is e6, knight f3, and if black normally continues bishop e7, then they will get hit by knight e5. Knight e5 is a wicked tempo on the queen, and black cannot play knight takes e5 because they lose immediately after pawn takes e5, attacking the knight on f6 and threatening bishop b5. So black is lost here. So after knight e5, black's only move is queen to c8. Then why did they play queen d7 if they have to go queen c8? But lately, they do play queen d7 a lot. And after knight d2, e6, knight f3, they play bishop takes f3, knight takes f3, and bishop d6. Let me explain you what's the idea behind it. If white plays bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and queen takes b7, then after castling, now black is threatening rook f8 to b8, and if white plays queen b3, then rook a to b8, and after queen c2, rook f to c8, black has sufficient compensation. Maybe even e5 move gives them very good position here. So it's not recommended to win this pawn on b7. So, and this position is regarded as approximately equal. I have some reservations about this position. I think white has a way to play for advantage. And here is what I would recommend. Do not take bishop on d6, but do play bishop g3. Now if black castles, we castle also. If now, eventually black is going to take the bishop on g3, and if they don't, later on we're going to play bishop h4. This is the most expected continuation, pawn takes. Now, let's talk why do we want our double pawns on g2 and g3 rather than pawns on h2, g2, f2. That we could have achieved by simply taking black's bishop on d6. No, but we want this pawn structure. And here is why. Suppose black goes rook b8, and black's normal plan is the queen side attack, which is pawn minority attack. how should white play this? Rook a to e1. It's important to put the a rook on e1. What we're going to do with the f1 rook, I will show in a moment. Now, a6 or b5. b5, I don't know if white can try bishop takes b5. If not, well, probably a6 move. Now, what we can do here is to go queen d1. Black goes b5. What is the plan for white here? Why do we want the rook on f1, and why do we want double pawns? Now we want to go g4. Now you can see that white wants to go g5. And here is this difference between double pawns and if pawn was on h2. If we want something like g4 in this position, that will be weakening our king side. But if we go g4 in a double pawn position, that will not be weakening our king side. And even more, what we want to do, we want to kick the knight from f6 and later play g3, king g2, and finally we found use for the f1 rook by putting it on h1. That's what our ideal plan is. That's what we are playing for. Of course, black is going to have counterplay on queen side, but that's what the chess is about. It's about the play, about the plan, and counterplay and counterplan. So after g4, if black tries to play knight takes g4, then small combination. After bishop takes h7, king takes h7, and knight g5, king g8, queen g4. Black is in a lot of trouble because there is a maneuver, queen h4, followed by queen h7, is very dangerous. So after, that's what our plan is. Again, I want to outline this plan. We have very strong bishop on d3 that is aiming on black's king side. So we want to play g4 if it works tactically. If it doesn't, what I mean by that is if black goes g6, now we obviously cannot go g4 because black simply is going to take on g4. So then we may want to go knight to e5. And again, if black takes on e5, we may take with a pawn, and knight does not have good places to go. And after queen c7, we may go f4, and our plan remains the same. We want to go g4, and later on g5, and try after rook f3, rook h3 to attack on h file. Remember, we can do it even with g3, king g2, and rook h1. This is the advantage of having double pawn. You need both G pawns to be successful in attack. This is an interesting idea that I adopted, and I think this is something worth playing for. White can count on as much of advantage in this variation than in any other variation of a Caro Kann. So this will cover queen d7 variation. And there is one last move left that we have to analyze. It's a queen c8 move, and here is the position. And after bishop g4, queen b3, queen c8. This is the most common move, the oldest move, and regarded as most reliable move. Now, white goes knight d2, black goes e6, white goes knight f3, black goes bishop e7, white castles, and black castles. And here, white plays knight e5. This is very tricky move. Originally, well, black should take. If black takes, actually the best move is bishop h5. Black cannot take. Now, if black takes, let's talk about the pawn structure here. Pawn structure after d takes and knight d7, following with knight c5. almost always favors in this position, in those kind of positions, almost always favors black, except for this particular position. In order for, and so white should always take with the bishop. But taking with the pawn here is very good for white, and here is the reason. Knight on d7. Black would have been perfectly okay if bishop stood on h5. Well, now white is taking advantage of black's bad position on g4. And after queen c2, black has significant problems. How to protect the h7 pawn? There are ways, like to play g6 or to play h6. Only other opportunity is to play f5. Then we just take en passant, and after knight takes f6, bishop e5, white has clear advantage. So the two moves we should analyze is g6 or h6. After g6, very simple answer is h3, and black must go to bishop f5, and bishop h5 is g4, and after bishop f5, bishop takes f5, regardless which way black retakes, they will have very bad pawn structure. So, and the move that's left is h6, then we go pawn h3, bishop h5, and pawn g4. And after bishop to g6, we have interesting tactical opportunity here to take the bishop on g6, and after f takes g, bishop takes h6. We sacrifice the bishop, and the best move here for black, and the only move, is knight takes e5, but then if white simply goes bishop a3, they have an advantage because of black's pawn structure again is real bad. We can go even f4 later, or rook e1 followed by f4. White has an advantage. But now let's see if black accepts the bishop sacrifice by playing g takes h. Now white gets 5 pawns for a minor piece in the winning position. Queen takes g6 check. Every move is forced. King h8, queen takes h6 check, forced king g8, queen takes e6 check, forced to play rook f7, since bishop on e7 is hanging, rook f7, queen takes d5, and here white has got 5 pawns for a bishop, and potentials of going f4, and at the same time immediate threat of e6. White is easily winning here. So now we determined that black has to be careful with the knight e5 move when white plays knight e5. And this is the position when white plays knight e5. And the best move for black is bishop h5. It's the only move practically. And this position again is referred as good position for black. Well, I'm not so sure if it's that good for black. Here's the one plan I can recommend. Rook a to e1. Again, I want to keep my rook on f1. Why would I lock? Every time I lock my rook on f1, I have a reason for it. Knight takes e5. And now we should take on e5 with the bishop. And here is the difference between this position and previous position we looked. On d8, knight d7, queen c2, black can simply play bishop g6, and we have no chances for attacking king side. So what is happening here after knight to e5, knight takes e5, white plays bishop takes e5, and bishop g6 is the best move. Bishop takes g6 and pawn takes g6. Well, I had this position against former world champion Anatoly Karpov in important action game, which is short time control game, and I got very good attacking position. What we do here, we play queen d1 or h4. So idea is to play queen d1, rook e3, g4, and h5. So if black plays here queen d7, after h4, we go queen d1, b5, rook e3, b4, or even rook c8 first. It doesn't change much. Then we go g4, b takes c, b takes c. Let's look at this position. Black has an advantage on queen side, and we have weak pawn on c3. What do we have in exchange for that? We have a chance of playing h5, and if black takes, white will take back, and eventually we can play rook g3, and you see there is a possible attack on the king side. Or play king g2 and rook h1. That's another way to bring the rook into the game. And if black does not accept, if black does not take on h5, and they play g5, for example, we can go f4. And no matter what black does, we will open, we're going to have an attack on the king side, and we will open the position on king side. So white has good attacking possibilities. Of course, there's a lot of play involved, and I would say this is the variation to consider to play against Caro Kann. So the variation I just recommended is exchange variation. Again, we quickly summarize it. The way white plays here is after e4, c6, d4, d5, white simply takes on d5 and goes bishop d3, knight c6, c3, knight f6, bishop f4. This position is, I gave more or less complete analysis here, and if you have any questions about it, you can either refer to the take for reference Modern Chess Theory, or you can find a way of contacting me, which we're going to have on the end of these discussions, ways of contacting me. So this is what I would recommend for white to play against Caro Kann.
4, 3, 2.
Now, for black, if you are a Caro Kann player, you must already, before viewing this program, this opening here, you must already have something in mind, and you must have repertoire, what variation of Caro Kann you want to play, and how would you play. Now, after e4, c6, d4, d5, as we said, there are countless possibilities for white. Here, there is a move knight c3, there is a move knight d2, there is e5 move, there is exchange variation, as we just covered, or pawn of attack with c4, or even f3 variation. Now, we cannot go on with every variation and cover absolutely everything we have here, because we don't have luxury of doing it here. But if we just picked one variation, the main variation, e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, de, knight takes e4. Still, big majority of the games where you play Caro Kann, that's the position you're going to get. And on knight d7, most of the people will play you knight f3. There is also bishop c4 move. And after knight f6, big majority will play you knight g3. So this position, in this position, I want you to introduce to an interesting idea. It's not necessarily new idea. It's the idea that is well forgotten and I think has as much rights for existence as any other variation in any opening. I am talking about the c5 move. Now, let's see what's the idea behind c5 move. Normally what they play is probably e6 and eventually they're going to go c5. No, I want to play c5 right away. Now, the reason why c5 we have to play with a pawn on e7, I'm going to explain now. After c5, there are two ways for white to play. Well, actually, more than two ways. White can take on c5, push d5, or just ignore in the center and continue development. Let's look at all three opportunities. If white takes on c5, obviously we are not going to retake with the knight and let exchange queens and have bad game. On d takes c, and we don't want to play e6 and bishop takes c5 because main idea of c5 move is to never play e6 and to develop bishop on g7. Now, after d takes c, we play queen a5 check, and otherwise it plays bishop d2 or c3, queen takes c5, bishop e3, queen c7. And after bishop e2, we go g6, castle, and bishop g7. Now let's talk about this position. You may say white is better developed. It may be so, but as you can see, knight on g3 does not have any future in this position. And later, what white wants to do, what black wants to do, black has an extra pawn in its center. They want to castle and play e5, and after this, both knights going to be very much restricted, and so is dark square bishop. What black may want to do is play e5, followed by b6 and bishop b7. They're going to have very, very good game. And if white is not careful, they may find themselves very quickly in a difficult position. Now, let's go back again to the introduction of, to the original position where we played c5. So here is the position where we played c5. Now, what else can white do here? d5, well, if they take, that's what happens. Queen a5 check, we just looked. And if white plays something like bishop c4, that's not going to change much because we're still going to play c takes d. And whatever way white retakes, we're going to go g6, and we're going on with the same exact plan. Bishop g7, castle, and e5. So if white takes, that's what's going to happen. If black takes, that's what's going to happen. It's about structurally the same positions, and d5 move is simply not good move because black quickly achieves at least equality. Knight b6, attacking the d5 pawn, and there are two ways only. Either white plays c4 or plays bishop b5 check, and after bishop d7, they just lost a pawn. White has lost a pawn already. There is no way to protect d7, d5 pawn, because after bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, d5 pawn is lost because on c4 we play knight takes c4. So only way not to lose the c pawn is to play c4. But now black goes e6, white is forced to take on e6, not to lose a pawn. Queen takes d1, king takes d1, bishop takes e6, and you can tell we shouldn't even discuss if white has any advantage or not. White has little disadvantage here. This position is absolutely great for black, and white has nothing. So this is just an idea, and I stay behind this idea. I like what the positions black can get after c5. And if white goes c3 and we take on c takes d and they take c takes d, now we can go ahead and change the plan. We may go knight b6, establishing control on d5 square, and following by maybe bishop g4, or even simply e6, bishop e7, bishop d7, and bishop c6. That's how black's pieces will be developed, and that's what their plan is going to be. Following by castling in the near future, and they will have very comfortable position. There is no justification for white's knight on g3. White knight has to be on c3 in those positions, and instead of putting knight on c3, white made 3 moves to put the knight on a bad position. This cannot be recommended. So that's briefly the idea of, if you want to adopt the new idea in Caro Kann, relatively new idea. It's not a new idea because it was played many years ago, but then for some unknown reason it was dropped. And I don't see any good justification for it, and I like to criticize some opening assessment, and I've done so. So far, I've done well with it, and you're most welcome to adopt my idea here in this Caro Kann opening. That will conclude my introduction to Caro Kann for white and for black.